The Fall of the House of Usher may be the most serious series in Flanagan's backlog. This one takes a different approach to the adaptation series that we have seen this far from him. With mostly unlikable characters and less heartstrings to pull on, this series unwinds as a dramatic modern mystery, but you may be shocked to know how closely it aligns with the source material. Now you've seen the series, let's pull back the bricklayers and reveal some details that you probably missed. And huge spoiler alert here, if you want a crash course to understand this series, keep watching till the end. Like The Haunting of Bly Manor was based on several pieces of Henry James's work, The Fall of the House of Usher is based on mainly short stories and poems, and actually one complete story by Edgar Allan Poe. And the devil is in the details because every name in this series has a purpose. Verna's name, played by Carla Gugino, is a rearrangement of The Raven, maybe the most famous poem by Poe. Prospero is the main character in Poe's story, The Masque of the Red Death. Frederick is the hero in the story, A Tale in Imitation of the German. It's quite funny because Frederick is the complete opposite in this story. It's kind of poking fun at his character. C. August Duplant is from Murders in the Rue Morgue. The other two characters in this story are Madame Anespene and her daughter Camille. And we have this merged together as Camille's character. And characters Rufus Griswold, William Longfellow, and John Neal are based on critic and writers who played a big part in Poe's influence, being that positive or negative. But my favorite part is the most mysterious character of the show, who's the family's lawyer, Arthur Pym. He has a really interesting way of fitting into Poe's work. His name is a reference to Poe's only complete full-length novel, which is titled The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, and the story follows a stowaway on a Nantucket whale ship who finds himself in the dark side of life at sea, facing cannibalism, savagery, and even death. And after learning these connections, it's pretty obvious where these stories match up with Poe's work, and some aren't as loosely based as you would think. Here is a crash course explaining all the original stories and how they're linked to these modern adaptations. Of course, let's start at the start. The Fall of the House of Usher. This is a short story about a man who visits his friend who's called Roderick Usher, of course, whose twin Madeline has died. They both bury her in a tomb, but at the end of the story, Madeline reappears much like their mother did at the start of the whole series. The unexplainable event then ends with the house, aka the House of Usher, splitting and falling in two. Of course, in the series, the visitor is C. August Juper, the attorney investigating the Usher family, but the original premise bookends the whole story with the title and of course the mother coming back at the start, which is exactly what happens in the story with Madeline. And the very last moments in this series, we have Madeline dying inside the house and it falling. So this really bookends the whole idea. It's also important to mention the themes of the original story of The Fall of the House of Usher are about twins and self-identity and unable to be split apart, which is a huge theme in the show because they have to die together. And although they're two sides of a coin and they have two separate identities, they are always linked by this. Perry's appearance follows the infamous The Masque of the Red Death, a story about Prince Prospero who wants to stay safe from a deadly plague called the Red Death. He and other rich people have a big party in his abbey with 7 colorful rooms, but during the party, someone pretending to have the Red Death comes in and walks through the rooms. When Prospero tries to stop this person, he finds out that there's nothing inside the costume, and then he, along with all of his guests, die. This, of course, is ramped up in the series, and we get what I believe to be the most gory scene throughout the whole show, but it does follow the original story's morals, with Perry Prospero dealing with the indifference of privilege with his family's dark legacy, and he suffers the consequences of his actions. I don't think that they quite justified everyone dying this awful death, but it's showing how he wanted to have this exclusivity, this party away from everyone, and how he felt and how he was so unaffected with the privileges that came from being attached to this dark legacy. In the original story of the murders in the Rue Morgue, we follow a detective that is exploring a double murder in Paris. And they make the connection to an orangutan that may have committed this heinous deed. And this, of course, is an obvious connection to the chimps that were used in testing for Victorine's side plot. How Flanagan used all of these unrelated stories, connecting them as one, involving even a chimpanzee, is really something. But possibly the most straightforward of all of his stories is the black cat. In the original, the narrator is an animal lover who descends into alcoholism, leading to violence, and he begins to mistreat his wife and eventually kills his cat, whose name was Pluto. But he finds another cat, and soon he carries his hatred to it, and he attempts to kill the second cat with an axe, but his wife stops him. Instead, the narrator murders his wife and conceals her body, you guessed it, in a brick wall in his basement. Okay, this one is right on the nose. Leo Usher has a substance abuse problem, and of course he wakes up after a night of blacking out to his cat Pluto, same name, being stabbed with a knife. He then finds a replacement cat who drives him insane. And of course, the buried in the wall, well, that's the damning fate of CEO GRISWOLD. But there is more on this in a second. In The Telltale Heart, the narrator tries to make the reader believe that they are sane while explaining a murder that they committed. The victim was an elderly man, and the narrator was obsessed with his eye, describing it as vulture eye. He kills him and then hides his body under the floorboards, but then is tormented by the sound of his heart. The two main symbols for this story are the eye, which represents evil, and the heart, which represents the narrator's guilt and conscience. Of course, the symbolism runs strong, with Vic's scientific ambition and greed leading her to kill her partner, and the guilt manifests in a similar way with the beating heart, which of course ties back in with their invention, on which they're testing it on the chimps that we mentioned earlier. And Frederick's death may have seemed like something out of a Final Destination movie, but it was inspired by the short story The Pit and the Pendulum, in which the main character is met with a similar sinister situation where a swinging blade from the roof aims to take his life. In the story, he is saved last minute, but we all know how it ends in the series. And of course, the raven is the most famous of all Poe's symbols. In the original poem, a man mourns his lost love while a raven perches and utters, "Nevermore." But really, the fall of the House of Usher is wrapped up in the raven. In fact, Verna takes the role of the raven, symbolizing the family's dark legacy and their inevitable fate, always waiting, watching, and haunting. But my favorite is the cask of Amontillado. And this is what seals the deal, no pun intended, that Poe loves his wall deaths. This is another story about someone meeting their maker inside a wall, and it's almost to the T of Rufus Griswold's demise. In the original story by Poe, a man seeks revenge on another, tricking him into becoming drunk and luring him to a place where no one could hear him scream. He's then chained and left for dead. This is exactly what happens in the TV series. His ego allows him to become drunk off the Amontillado. He also boasts about part of this office being built when no one can hear you scream. In the story, the victim even claims that it must be a sick joke what is happening to him, which is exactly what happens in The Fall of the House of Usher. The connection really wraps up the poetry of the series. You can really see why all of the stories at first seem random, but they're linked through Poe's work, and there's countless other nods, including Tamerlane and the Gold Bug. Did you find another nod? Leave it in the comments. And don't forget, there's a lot of content out this month. Here is a comprehensive list with what to watch and where and when it goes live. It's also pinned in the comments of this video if you want a cheat sheet. Remember to stay safe and stay spooky. Nevermore.